There is a garden, there is a city, and there's a kingdom of God. And it is beautiful, and he is bringing it right now into our midst.
Yeah, not exactly Spotify there, is it? Those old record players, wow. Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to those who are over in the Life Center, and welcome to everybody watching at Living Word Online. So glad that you could be part of week number 1 of our Christmas series. Going to get into that in a moment, but before I do, I'd like to give a shout out to 2 different groups of ministry partners. We use the language ministry partner to talk about those people who use their gifts, their skills, their talents, their time to make a real difference here. We had one group of ministry partners who pulled off a wonderful Thanksgiving day right here at Living Word for a whole lot of people who would have otherwise been by themselves and not had much of a meal. So we had people preparing food, serving food, cleaning up, just having a great time. So I just thank you for that entire group of ministry partners who made a wonderful, wonderful day for a lot of people. And then there was another group of ministry partners in here all throughout this past week and just kind of transforming this building to make it look like the Christmas season. And so all the different things are going up. Another group of people gave a whole lot of time. So can we say thank you to them as well? Really, really appreciate the people who are using their skills to make a difference. Hey, John chapter, one more thing before I get into that. We also, we're going to do something new this year. We have a remembrance tree that is out on this side of the lobby. So the giving trees are over here, but a remembrance tree, what that is for is at Christmas time, many of us have people that are no longer with us that we love very much and we miss. And we thought this year, let's have a tree where we can put some photographs of those people that are now gone from our presence, and we'd like to remember them. So if you bring in a photograph, now you won't get that photograph back, so you need to make a copy of it. But if you bring that in, we will trim it up and get that on the tree out here, and then all month long, we'll just be kind of remembering those people who have been a very important part of some of our Christmases past. John chapter 3, verse 16 is probably the most well-known Bible verse there is, for God so loved the world. And I'm going to come back to the rest of that a little bit later on in the message. I just came across another quote that I've never heard before in all my years. And here's what it says: "Blessed is the season which engages the whole world in a conspiracy of love." Wow, did I ever resonate with that language? There's something about this season that is engaging the whole world in a conspiracy of love. We're going to come back to that in a little bit as well. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really moving into the Christmas music time. And for the last 2 weeks, I've actually been listening to Christmas music on my radio. I've got a couple different stations, but one of them is playing Christmas music nonstop. So I'm all the time turning that on to hear if there's some songs I want to listen to. Really been enjoying that. And just the other day, I downloaded completely on my iPod nothing but Christmas music. And so I'll be using that for all of my workouts in December, listening to Christmas music. And I really look forward to that as well. But man, Christmas music, I love. Probably my favorite Christmas music is Handel's Messiah. And you know what's kind of interesting is it didn't start out as Christmas music. They actually performed Handel's Messiah during the Lenten season in preparation for Easter, because a bunch of the Messiah has to do with the death and the resurrection of Jesus. But more than 1/3 of it has to do with the birth of Jesus. And so as time went on, Handel's Messiah became a Christmas performance, which it still is today. In 1990, a group of contemporary Christian artists released what they called the Young Messiah. 4 years later, they released, a different group released another version called the New Young Messiah. And in 1994, a whole group of us from Living Word went down to Baltimore and we listened to that concert. It was just amazing. And I have both of those albums. And yesterday I listened to both those albums in their entirety. And man, I was just so psyched about Christmas. Trans-Siberian Orchestra. Becky and I, for many years, we would go on a yearly basis. Now we don't get there quite so often, but we just love their music. And there's something really interesting. Here is this group of sort of like metal, hybrid classical musicians that they have found a way to tell the spiritual story of Christmas in a very contemporary way that grabs the hearts of so many people. And one of my favorites is their third album called The Lost Christmas Eve. And that's actually telling the story of God sending the youngest angel down to planet Earth to look and find that person who is most doing the work of Jesus. I mean, just kind of striking that this group of individuals is just performing for the whole month their music, and just hundreds of thousands of people will listen to that music. I'll listen to all 7 of their albums in this month. You know, maybe my favorite album and my favorite song on that album is by Down Here, a Canadian group. And the album is called How Many Kings, and that's actually the name of my favorite song on the album, How Many Kings. Let me just read you the lyrics. How many kings stepped down from their thrones? How many lords have abandoned their homes? How many gods have poured out their hearts to romance a world that is torn all apart? And how many fathers gave up their sons for me? Those lyrics are so powerful. And the lead singer of Down Here, his voice is so amazing and the melody is so haunting. The first time I wound up catching that on a video, there's a little video of them doing a studio recording. I just listened to it over and over and over. I must have listened to it close to a dozen times, just repeat. I could not get enough of those haunting lyrics. How many kings stepped down from their thrones? There's, every now and then I run across a song that it's just kind of weird. Or there's parts of it that are kind of weird. And one of those songs is, it's the most wonderful time of the year. Now, by the way, every now and then you just kind of have to give the lyric writers a little bit of space, but it's the happiest season of, talk about lame writing. Happiest, is that the best you could do? But then it gets a little better. There'll be parties for hosting, marshmallows for toasting and caroling out in the snow. There'll be scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago. Who tells scary ghost stories at Christmas? Well, apparently that's exactly what they did back in Victorian England. And by the way, wasn't Pastor John really rocking this sort of Victorian sideburns? Yeah, he does it every Christmas time. It's a mystery to me, frankly. No, in Victorian England, they would tell scary ghost stories on Christmas Eve, which, by the way, is what Dickens' Christmas Carol is. It's a scary ghost story of Ebenezer Scrooge meeting the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. So it's just kind of intriguing, some of the history that is behind some of these Christmas songs. But my favorite Christmas hymn of all time, it's the most perfect Christmas hymn that there is Joy to the World. And there's so many powerful lyrics in that particular song, but it finishes with, and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love. There is something about this season that just stirs us. Yes, I know for so many people, the holidays become much more secular than it is sacred. Yes, for many people, materialism seems to crowd out the spiritual. Yes, for so many people, Jesus as the reason for this season is far removed and mostly forgotten from their particular Decembers. But for so many of us, it's this time of the year that something stirs within. Certain things are awakened inside of us, and we feel a little different this time of the year. There are longings and desires that get stirred. There are expectations and disappointments that most of us feel. There are these really powerful emotions that are awakened. Some of them beautiful, some of them a little bit harder. And then there's the music that just moves us, that talks about all of these desires, expectations, and emotions. It's just something about this time of the year. And maybe the strongest thing that stirs in us this time of the year is that crazy little thing called love, which isn't so crazy and it's not so little. Love is the greatest, the deepest, the strongest reality of this season, and it stirs within us. And if it doesn't stir, and if we are missing it, it becomes one of the most painful realities of the season. You know, we managed to get through a lot of the year by neglecting it, ignoring it, stuffing it to the side, pushing it off, getting by. But when we finally get to Christmas, it doesn't matter how valiant our attempts have been for the previous 11 months. It just seems somehow at this month, it begins to bubble over and spill into our lives and splash around everywhere, and you just can't get away from this not so crazy, not so little thing called love. I mean, by the way, back to Dickens' Christmas Carol, it's all about love. Here is the mean, miserly Ebenezer Scrooge, who has no interest in helping anybody else. It's all about himself. And he is given a fresh start, a second chance, and a new beginning through the visitations of these three different ghosts. And at the end, he winds up repenting from the kind of person that he was. He becomes a brand new person, and now he is this compassionate, generous giver, and Tiny Tim lives. Look, let's just name it for what it is. It's a love story. And how about that not so silly story by Dr. Seuss, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas? Listen, even Jim Carrey's terrible acting could not take away from the fact that the Grinch's heart grew 3 sizes that day. And he became this generous giver. It's a love story. In 1914, World War I is taking place. And for months, there had already been, the trench warfare, destruction, death, killing, horrible, horrible battles going on. But then something marvelous happened on Christmas Eve of 1914. On both sides, the soldiers began coming out of their trenches. They were laying down their weapons, and they came toward one another. The British, the French, the Germans, they came toward one another, and they began to exchange gifts. They began to share food. They began to sing songs together. They told stories about their families. They played sports. They played a soccer game together. Something magical, something mysterious, something beautiful happened that Christmas Eve on 1914. The killing stopped and the camaraderie started. And after it was over and they went back for weeks after that, none of the soldiers would pick up their weapons to fight until the orders came from up above, you have to fight, and then the killing resumed. But for a short time, because of something beautiful on that Christmas Eve, it all stopped. There was peace on earth, there was joy to the world, and there was wonders of his love taking place on a battlefield. And aren't there the more mundane stories that we hear about all the time? Stories like Kim Kershaw and another woman named Shireen Bohr. And Kim was a single mother, a number of children. She's really struggling to make ends meet. It wasn't going to be much of a Christmas. And she is driving to the store to buy a couple of presents for her kids. And she's not paying attention. And she crashes into Shireen's car. And car accidents are never any fun. They're certainly even less fun on a December when you're already struggling and broke and just trying to figure out how you're going to buy a couple presents. And here is Kim, and she now realizes that she's going to be out a whole bunch more money, and she's talking to Shireen. And then something wonderful happens. When Shireen hears Kim's story, what Shireen decides is she's going to buy all the presents for Kim's kids because Kim will no longer have the money because of the car stuff. Sometimes we run into stories of road rage. This was a story of road love. And those things happen all the time. Oh, yeah, there is something about this season, that there's a conspiracy of love that is engaging the world and is beautiful. And we can't get away from it. It's stirring all around us. John chapter 3, verse 16. In Matthew and Mark, and Matthew and Luke, we read the stories of the birth of Jesus. Matthew talks about wise men and evil kings. Luke talks about shepherds and angels. In both Matthew and Luke, you're going to hear the words joy and peace and hope. You're not really going to read words about love in either of their stories. You will hear the word mercy a couple of times. You get to the shortest gospel, that of Mark, and there's not even a bit about the birth of Jesus. And then we come to the gospel of John, and there John doesn't tell the story, but what John does is John shares the spiritual significance of what happened on that Christmas. And so we read in John chapter 3, verse 16, from the Message, "This is how much God loved the world. He gave his Son, his one and only Son. And this is why. By believing in him, anyone can have a whole and lasting life. God didn't go to all the trouble of sending his son merely to point an accusing finger, telling the world how bad it is. He came to help, to put the world right. Man, that's a Christmas verse. It's a story of a conspiracy of love unleashed by God. You see, love gives. It's what love does. The greater the love, the more love gives. God's love was very great, and God's very great love gave his very best. God gave us himself. God gave us Jesus. And God gave his very best Jesus for a reason, because the world was in a sorry mess, and God wanted to help and set right all that had gone wrong. Not to wag an accusing finger at anybody, but just to say, here to help. I'm here to set things right, because that's what love does. But before love could give its very best for those who were most in need, love had to do something else. Do you guys remember the documentary that came out about Mr. Rogers and the whole language of "Would you be my neighbor?" Was the name of the documentary. There's just something about this concept of neighbor and connecting. And then Tom Hanks just has released another movie about Mr. Robertson. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. There's that word neighbor. Do you know that's the word that is used in John chapter 1, verse 14. God became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. Don't you love that? God became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. You know the word Emmanuel and also the other variation, Emmanuel. Both translations mean God with us. That's because that's what love does. Love wants to give its very best to those who need it the most, but to do that, love has to draw close. I mean, love's not indifferent. Love's not distant. Love's not far off removed. Love draws close and moves into your neighborhood to be as close to you as love can possibly get. You know, there are these places in the world, massive urban poverty, just sprawling squalor. You can hardly imagine how bad it gets. They're called by different names: slums, ghettos, shanty towns. Some of them are actually like garbage cities. Entire areas, just, the garbage of a city has been dropped there, and it's become a place where thousands and thousands of people live. In Spanish, they sometimes call them the barrios. In Portuguese, they call them favelas. Just massive urban poverty. Many years ago, when I was on one of my trips to India, I'm flying into, then it was called Bombay, now it's called Mumbai. And the plane was actually pretty low, and I had a window seat, and as we're flying in, I'm looking out the window, and I literally cannot believe my eyes, because below, just stretching on forever, and the plane was flying slow, and it went on forever, there was this slum, bigger than I could conceive. It was dirty, it was smoky, and as I'm looking, I'm just thinking, how can anybody live there? And here I am flying high above it. And you say, I could never live there. I can't imagine what it's like to live there. I've been to Cape Town a number of times to do ministry, and right outside Cape Town is I think one of the most beautiful places in South Africa. It is Stellenbosch is the name of the area, and it's a place of beauty, it's a place of wealth, it's a place of luxury. Some of the finest wines in the world are grown in the Stellenbosch region. And then there is another area as a part of Cape Town, and the name's a little hard to pronounce, but here's how I pronounce it. It's Khayelitsha. Khayelitsha is one of those slum areas. And on one of my visits to Cape Town, one of my friends I was working with, he took me to the outskirts of Khayelitsha. And he said, we're not going to go in there. You don't want to go in there. And I was thinking, you're right. I don't want to go into Khayelitsha. It was just enough to get close and smell what it was like. You know, Bill Gates is worth about $110 billion. Not million, billion. One of the wealthiest people in the United States. A great philanthropist, by the way. Very generous. Could you imagine Bill Gates, who is living in a very nice place here in the United States? He said, hey, I am so concerned for the people of Kalayitsa that I'm going to fly over there a couple times a year and do some work with them. And so he does that. He flies over there and goes in and works a couple times a year with them. That's not what God did on Christmas. Could you imagine Bill Gates saying, oh, it's not good enough to fly over there a couple of times a year. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move over into one of those nice places in Stellenbosch, and every week I'm going to go down into Kalayitsa, and I'm going to help the people there once a week. That's not what God did on Christmas. Could you imagine Bill Gates saying, hey, that's not good enough. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and build a really nice place right down there in the middle of Kalayitsa, and every day I'm going to go out there and help the people because I care about them. That's not what God did at Christmas. Could you imagine Bill Gates just giving everything up that had, just letting it all go, and says, I'm going to move into the neighborhood. I'm going to move into one of those places of squalor and filth, and I'm going to be there 24/7, 365, as long as I can to make a difference in their lives. If you can imagine that, then you're starting to get in the terrain of what God did when Jesus was born in a manger and moved into our neighborhood. How much does God love you? The baby Jesus in a manger, it's a feeding trough for animals, and the man Christ hanging on a cross, that's how much God loves you. How much does God love you? Well, God loves you so much that he gave his very best to those who were in the greatest need. He left everything go and moved into the neighborhood of your life so he could give you what only he could give you, and that is life. That's how much God loves you. Do you know the French word Noel, it actually means Christmas song or Christmas story. It can be translated either way. A Noel is a Christmas story of amazing love. Every time we sing Noel, I'm singing a story of amazing love. I am singing the wonders of his love, the wonders of his love, and wonders of his love. Oh yes, this season, blessed be this season, which engages the whole world in a conspiracy that started in the manger and ended on a cross of God's love for you and I.